there is a headline of the week. We've got double-digit questions, maybe 20 separate people are all wondering, where's the On Fire podcast? Did the On Fire podcast quiet quit? Where is he? Where are
Yeah.
they?
Okay. So I want to, Sam, bring up for us, let's get the official answer to this question because it had been, we did a draft earlier in the offseason of who's going to be the co-host for On Fire for this season. And then we were waiting to hear who won the draft, who was going to be the co-host for the On Fire season 50 podcast. And then the Survivor 50 premiere came and went. And then there was no word, but we do have an official answer on this as to where is the On Fire podcast, which I believe premiered during Survivor 44. Here is from Variety. Jeff Probst explains why the official Survivor 50 podcast is on hiatus for Survivor 50. And so the answer is, this is what Jeff Probst said. Survivor 50 was designed as a celebration, and it features one of the most exciting game designs we've ever done, Probst said in a statement to Variety. Because of that, we made a conscious decision not to immediately pull back the curtain while it was happening. We wanted fans to discover it on their own and experience it in real time. Then at the live finale, we'll all have the opportunity to reflect on all parts of this season together. Okay.
It's an interesting answer. I understand the latter more than I understand the former. I understand, hey, we're having a finale. The things that we would talk about on the podcast, we're going to save for the finale. But the middle part is interesting to me, that they don't want to pull back the curtain immediately during the season when this feels like the season, and correct me if I'm wrong, this feels like the season that you'd want to do the additional content as they've done all of this marketing push beforehand. They've got the book, Jeff's book that's coming out. They have all this new stuff that they're doing. Yes, it's on the. I have a couple in the other room.
How do you get?
Yeah, I wonder. I bought one organically
a
couple days before it came out, and then we were at the thing the other night, and they gave them out. So I have one in a little bag. So if anybody wants one, and you're listening, and I live within a block of you, I'll bring it to you. Yeah, it seems like this is the season that you'd want to do it, and they don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting for sure. And I miss it because I felt like that the On Fire podcast was additive. I liked listening to it every week. It was part of my Thursday ritual of watch the show on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, I'd like to listen to the On Fire podcast and get any sort of like additional information about it. I just wonder, did Jeff lose interest in doing it, where in season 49, I think that the probably, with all due respect to Jeremy's addition to the podcast, I think probably the most memorable things that came out of the podcast in season 49 was the discourse about Parvati. Was she a half winner from Australian Survivor? Did that count as a full win? So the things that really broke through about the On Fire podcast were the things that were sort of the controversial things and controversial skewing negative around the On Fire podcast. And so with everything that Jeff has going on, in addition to finishing Survivor 50, also they're casting Survivor 51 and anything else that he's doing, was the juice worth the squeeze for Jeff?
Yeah, I wonder how far they got into the process before they decided to not do it. Because you would imagine right after 49, maybe it feels like this is the natural, as we all thought, it's the natural thing to do at this moment.
Is if his heart's not in it and he doesn't really want to come back and do it, it's not like that. I mean, listen, they make plenty of money from making Survivor. It's not like that Jeff's in the podcast game for the money. So he's got to be in it for the love of the game. And if for any reason it becomes not so fun to do it, I just think that there's other places that he could spend his time. It's a big commitment to do it for every single episode. He puts a lot into everything that he does. And it's not like that one more person watches Survivor because of the official On Fire podcast.
And it's funny, this we get all these submissions. There's literally, I'm looking at 25 submissions of people asking what we think happened, where it went, whatever. Truthfully, I didn't know that this many people were as invested in the On Fire podcast as like you and I are,
Oh,
who
I'm
listen to
sure.
it
I'm
each
sure
week.
people are. And here's the thing that I've learned about podcast listeners over these last 15 years. A lot of them are creatures of habit. That, okay, I like this podcast. This comes out on this day. What do you mean this podcast isn't coming back? So the people who were listening to it, I think, were trained to be looking for it on Thursdays. And so it was, I think, a big surprise to, in this huge season of Survivor, to not have the On Fire podcast come back.
Just to share personal experience of the New York City events this past week, I had like a hunch, and I think this was the rumor online after Boston Rob just is the Traders podcast that maybe he is the next host, and they're going to announce it this week.
Mhm.
And then he, like his flight gets canceled due to the weather, and then we're all together, and then Sophie Bellardi is here in New York, and I'm like, oh, that makes sense to me. Maybe they'll announce that, and then they don't, and then Kyle gets medevaced. And I'm like, oh, is Kyle the way that like Tyson is doing the
Mhm.
House of Villains podcast? Like,
Yeah.
is it Kyle perhaps? And it's not Kyle either. They're just not doing it.
They're just not doing it. And I do see a world where maybe they just take off season 50 and maybe it comes back for Survivor 51, where maybe there's more things in Survivor 51 that Jeff wants to give a peek behind the curtain. So I don't think that necessarily it's over, but I think that for whatever reason, they didn't want to do it for 50, and maybe that Jeff will miss it and want to come back and do it for 51.
And not to totally pull behind the curtain. And I can't remember if they've ever said this on the On Fire podcast, but it is not like they film it, ahead because of just the travel that you have to do in the spring or what have you. So it is not an easy operation. It's not just meeting at 4:00 every week to do it. I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it. And you'd have to give your potential guests, they have to be like 6-7 weeks ahead of time. So yeah, I guess not worth it. But I was excited to hear, there's so much new stuff that's happening on season 50 that wasn't happening on 48 or 49. Like so many swings they're taking that we can see from the preview and what have you. So like there's never been a time where I've been more invested in peeling back the curtain.
Well, if only there was any other way to satisfy the podcast thirsty audiences of Survivor. I hope that there is some way.
I'm the Jay Wolf of this network, is what they say. That's what all the message boards say.
Yes.
And you're the Jeff.